Okay, episode 4 is live. Welcome back to the Sin and Tay podcast, video cast. How are you, Dante?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm awesome. All right, so we're recording episode 4 today, and we had a bit of a chat during the week, and we thought, what can we make episode 4 about? In the first 3 episodes, if you guys have caught up, we have spoken about how we met. Sorry, how we connected, and then we spoke about how we met, and then we also spoke about in episode 3, after our meeting and deciding, how we're going to try and pursue this long distance relationship, and if we were both committed to giving it a go. So you can catch all 3 of them on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which is the Sin and Tay YouTube channel. We've also got Instagram, which is Sin and Tay, and our podcast on any podcasting platform is up and running at the moment. So you can catch us on audio only if you are the type of person who likes to listen to podcasts while you're driving. So today, episode 4, we are probably going to dive into more of the mindset and mindfulness that you kind of need to have or be equipped with techniques and ways of dealing with things that come up when you are in a long distance relationship, which, can bring up a lot of mixed emotions. So making sure that your mind is right and your approach and your understanding is right is probably really important when we start pursuing a relationship. So that's basically what we're going to try and discuss and see what comes up today as we go through this podcast. Anything you want to add? I can't hear you. Are you muted?
How about now?
That's
All right.
right.
I'm back.
Technical difficulty.
The volume got turned all the way down. See, my
Yeah,
volume is probably going different ways right now.
that's all
Yeah.
good. Got
So
it.
yeah. So what we're talking about today too is then the different styles of long distance relationship and some of the questions that people fears and doubts that might arise in people's minds that maybe a less seasoned couple and would probably struggle with. That's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, for sure. But go ahead and get started if you want, Cindy. On.
Yeah, all right. So I think when I kind of started realizing that there was something here and that we were going to try and see where this relationship was going to go, I kind of really had to have like an inner talk with myself to kind of think of what is it that I really need to make sure that I show up with to make to give this any opportunity to work. And we've discussed it also in some of the other podcasts that we've done, and we've got communication and trust and things like that need to come up. But being in a position where I think in your own mindset, you really do need to be in a position where you understand that you're not desperately you're not desperately seeking an attachment to someone. Your mind's got to be more of, what are we nurturing here? Is there something that we can both offer each other and work together as as a couple in a relationship? Because it's really easy to get obsessed with somebody if you're kind of not stable and sure within yourself as you show up to something. So a lot of work needs to be done, and whether you do it beforehand or you discover it together, I think you really need to make sure that you're coming into a relationship with a lot of tools that are going to help you both, I think.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about codependency. That people might fall into in a long distance relationship, where they kind of get codependent upon, like, certain times of communication, a certain type of interaction, and and that's kind of one of the risks that you run into. Also, kind of a delusional. I constantly like kind of do a gut check and a mental check. I'm like, is this, we're not being delusional here, right? Like, because this is a pretty far distance that we're dealing with. So I think we've had some pretty, real conversations early, just as far as what's possible, what's realistic, what's fair, what's, what I mean, what's
Yeah.
doable and feasible. Um, and we've been able to come to kind of an actualization about what's possible in our situation. But that's kind of the point where I'm going, is that you got to have an end game. And a lot of people, I don't think, have an end game in their long distance relationship, and that's when it becomes a crutch or a codependency, or a thing where you're afraid of a real commitment, or really having to go out and meet somebody, or seeing someone every day, or having that responsibility of all that. And when you get into a long distance relationship, those are the questions that you want to be asking yourself: is, am I coming from the right place, from a place of, like we said in the first episode, we just didn't elaborate, but from an abundance mindset,
Hmm.
of possibility, a miracle mindset, of a growth mindset, not fixed. When you start thinking that way, then you're on the right track to know that you have something that could become, you know, a good thing in
Real.
the long run, and
Yeah.
real. Yeah, real,
It's really easy to get caught up in a fantasy, the fairy tale of a long distance relationship sounds really romantic when you've got all these, there's movies out there that romanticize, a long distance relationship, and getting caught up in that is, I think it's such a short term thing that will happen. And if you are caught up in all that without really sitting down and working out, every article and every podcast I've listened to, because once I realized that, this is probably going to be a long distance relationship, with the end goal being we end up together, but there will be some time between that and now. I kind of delved into, reading some articles and listening to some podcasts. And, I think that a long distance relationship without an end goal, it doesn't last, because long distance relationships already have a very, very low success rate, being that, people do get caught up in the fantasy, and then it fizzles out when the reality of, I can't see you all the time, and I call you and you're not there, and all that stuff gets in the way. And then I think that that's probably a lot of the reasons why they don't work out. So the mindset and the reasons that you're doing the things that you're doing are super important, and you need to be strong enough to either realize that the person that you are in this relationship with is worth, making the conscious mindful effort, constantly being present, going, this is where we're at, and this is what we're doing, and working together to get to that end goal. It keeps it all, alive and working. I think that, otherwise it'll fizzle out. It'll fizzle out because people lose interest, and the investment is not authentic or genuine. The investment's in the fantasy, not the investment in the what's life going to be like, how do we get together, and how do we get this sorted. um,
yeah.
Distance was just how we started. Yeah.
Most people don't have the maturity, to be honest with the other person, let alone honest with themselves about, is this doable? Is this feasible? It's more of like, oh, great, I can buy my time, as far as like, and then in the meantime, like, kind of like, it's convenient, or they're willing to spend money to fly to come see me, or I'm going to fly me out, or whatever. Sometimes that becomes a circumstance. It's funny, as you're talking about reading books and bettering yourself, I think about, this is kind of a sidebar about just certain people, and like, you give certain people, like, they're like, oh, why are you reading that book? Why are you trying to get better? Why are you trying to get that information? Why would you want to know that? Like, they want you to stay in this fixed mindset, almost so that they can manipulate you, so that they have some
Absolutely.
sort of power over you, you know what I mean? And and I think too, like, in long distance relationships, that can happen as well, where a person you get into like this manipulative type set of circumstances, just, through controlling a person, through, guilt and shaming them about not answering, not being available for you, not picking up, you know what I mean? And you're falling out of a place of being genuine and authentic when you're in that mindset, in that space. And you're really kind of, you're creating this undercurrent. So on the surface, you guys talk every day, it's all good, everything is cool. But on the undercurrent, the subconscious level, there's a whole lot of distrust and you know, manipulative tactics, psychological, obviously, because they're not in front of you, but those
Exactly.
can be equally as powerful as physical, if not more, because you don't always see these in action. They may not even be aware of these things. They're just projecting their fears and concerns from a past relationship that they've had, you know, and they're projecting that into these circumstances, you know. And sometimes, so I think just the conversation today is leading into a space of like coming into a relationship being realistic. And in order to know that other person, to know what you're dealing with, you have to know yourself first. So if you haven't done the healing and the thought process, you know, the thought processes and processed all the stuff and the shit that you have from your past and from your past relationships, and that you're not projecting an old pattern into new circumstances, expecting a
Mm.
different result, and then wondering why you keep getting the same thing, and you haven't done anything other than blame, 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 and look for the way that you don't want to see the thing in that next person, and you're just making sure you don't see that thing, you're always going to find that thing because that's what your mind is on.
Yeah, and you end up also attracting the same kind of person when you don't do the work. So the same type of people with the same characteristics end up showing up in your life because you're constantly attracted to that drama and that, you know, the unsettled relationship, because as people get into patterns, and even though they're bad, fighting, mistrust, all that kind of stuff, it becomes familiar, so it's something that you actually are drawn to when you're not in the right frame of mind. So perfect thing that you mentioned was making sure you've done the work. I mean, showing up as a different person brings about a whole different experience, and I think that that's the reason why, um, you know I was saying to you, I think before we started recording, I don't think I could have done a long distance relationship, 10 years ago, because I wasn't a person that was secure in myself, or I felt that I was that people pleasing kind of person where I would put my needs at the back of everything else, after my kids, after my work, after my partner, and all that. So I was always going to show up as, less than what I was deserving of receiving. So that's perfect. And also, too, that undercurrent that you mentioned, it's undercurrent and subconscious, but eventually it starts rising to the top. So then the arguments that you have, or the mistrust, it all stems from the misunderstanding, because you're not both grounded in in something together. So I think you and I have had a lot of conversations where we kind of, we know that there's a foundation that's kind of at this point, even though it's only new. We both have very similar goals. We've got very similar ways that we want to show up as people individually, not even as a couple, but individually. Like, there's a lot of things that you have instilled in yourself over the work that you have done and that you are doing, because at the end of the day, we're never really completely overdoing the work. We're constant students of life.
Journey,
So
it's the journey,
yeah, absolutely.
marathon
So,
and the journey.
yeah, yep, exactly. And we do the work. So, and we've done the work separately. And then we just we encourage ourselves, and basically acknowledge that in each other. So I think that that's, really important if you are in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to just be long distance, because, it could be in a relationship that you've got in your life at the moment as well. You have to be grounded in something that's connected or similar, same mindsets.
That's the advantage, I think, of a long distance relationship, you know, because the activities that a couple is in proximity of each other, you know, they have a lot of things that they take for granted. So as far as conversations going deep, they're too busy creating activities and creating things to do together, which there's a lot that can be had and learned through, you know, experiencing and going out, you know, into the wilderness with the person that you care about. But I think there's more value, you know, in the first session of the relationship, of getting to know the person, what makes them tick, what they like, where they're coming from, what their thought process is. You know, one of the things about Cindy that I noticed immediately, just from talking to her, that she didn't have a victim mindset, and she wasn't really in relationships with people that fully appreciated her. Now, whether that was because the person that I see now didn't match the person who she used to be with them, that's quite possible. Because, you know,
Mhm.
I think that any of us have been in past relationships, and the versions of ourselves that we know that we are the best parts of ourselves, the parts that we want people to know about and experience. Someone from our past may not, you know, reconcile that information. They may not feel the same way, and they may have a different opinion, but that was based on a different version of you at that time, you know.
Exactly.
So it's like, could I go and ask these guys what they thought and their opinion? And I'll be like, okay, either she's probably either not that person anymore, or they weren't able to understand that person. So it's like one of the two is how I look at it. And then so I look at it like you want to observe a person's mindset, behavior, attitude towards things, their empathy, compassion. My first thing I notice about Cindy is that how she puts everybody and everything else before her. You know what I mean? And that I get that. I get that selfless attitude, you know. And that's honestly, and to be in a long distance thing, you kind of do have to kind of put the other person's concern, but that's a very delicate and slip and fragile and thin line of like not crossing over into like being manipulated and having a person that easily is because if you're dealing with a person that's like a pathological liar and you're in a long distance relationship, you're done.
Completely.
You're done.
Yeah, I think also too, there's a big difference between sacrificing yourself to put others first, which is what I used to do, versus I see the importance now of people needing to be heard. There's a lot of people that we come into spaces with, and and people that I deal with in my day-to-day life, where I know people need to be heard. I don't have to. I like giving people that space so that they feel comfortable in being authentic, because when you are authentic, you, it's hard. You can't fall out of character. So if you're with a pathological liar, like you mentioned just now, eventually that will be revealed. Because I have had in the past a guy that I dated who was just the most pathological liar I've ever met. I only dated him for, I don't even think I got to a year at one point, but it was just crazy. He would lie about absolutely anything. And it was like, I can't, this is crazy. Like the simplest of things would be lied about. But yeah, definitely, definitely giving people space to shine. That music's a little bit loud now, music, but it's gone up a bit in volume. But yeah, no, definitely super important. I think one of the things I noticed, or actually I keep noticing about you, is that you don't so again, back to the clubhouse, because that's where we are in spaces where we got to see each other and how we act, and the kind of people that we show up as on a regular basis. And you're someone that doesn't speak for the sake of speaking. You actually will speak and share your thoughts when it's important, and you've got something that of value to say. A lot of the times, people just jump up and they want to be in the spotlight and listen to me, and here I am, and But you're someone that's very calculated well, calculated is a bit of a harsh word, but you're really you're really
Intentional.
that's the one, intentional. You really do make sure that what you say is important, and yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. Probably at one point to a fault, but now I think I've gotten to a point where, it's I know where and when what I have to say is fits, and to be honest with you, that's the purpose of why we're even doing this podcast. It's like, why would we sit here and drop all these gems to each other and just rah each other when like there's a lot of people out here, a lot of relationships that can value from a quality long distance conversation, if not even some coaching, you know what I mean? And that's really for me is the ultimate goal, is like I always keep my eyes on the prize, nothing that lends to my demise, looking at the finish line, you know what I mean? Always eyes on the finish line and not the short-sighted goal, not the shiny thing right in front of me, and having that having that discipline, because ultimately um that's where the magic lies, is on the other side of that. And for me it's like, you know you can look at things a lot of different ways as far as relationship in different circumstances, and different people have different philosophies based on how they were raised or grew up. But I know the guy that I've always been, probably since like seventh grade, sixth grade, when first started being around girls. I know my mindset mentality, and I used to actually reject that version of myself because I was always kind of like a hopeless romantic and a person that was like, oh man, like, oh shit, I got to make sure I do it. Like, I got to buy her, oh, we're girlfriend, boyfriend, I got to go get her something. Like, I just always felt like I had to do something for the person I was with. And, that's great, especially if you get someone that really like receives that and appreciates that. And is, cause you gotta, and there's a lot of different, things I learned about over time because, like with some of my exes and whatnot, you know, some people take what you do for them for granted, right? So even though that's your love language, that's just an expectation for them. You know what I mean? So they don't necessarily receive it as love, they receive it as an expectation.
Yeah.
And your value becomes based on that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be money. It can be the fact that the way that you take care of the kids, or the way that you always have something done around the house and there's an expectation set, or the fact that they can go off and do shit or lie to a person and tell them different stories and get away with that. You know what I mean? And, when you're getting into like long distance relationships and stuff like that, I think it's really important to see like what a person's intention is in the long run and like what you can expect from them. You know, yeah, you got to see how it goes, but I think pretty early on you're going to have a clear understanding of, all right, how does this person fit in my life? And how
Yeah.
can I complement their life? And very early, me, just as an example, me and you immediately had a conversation about, well, who's moving where if this thing kind of works out? You know what I mean? Because like with me,
Absolutely.
I knew I had this acting thing going on here in Atlanta. I knew I have this facility maintenance business I'm building out. You know, a lot of the other things, the coaching, and the fitness training, that can be done anywhere. But as far as when it came to those other businesses, I had to be in the city. At least at
Exactly.
this point, until I'm like, like a name actor, and I can live in Antarctica and they call me when they got a movie. But it's like the 1% of the
Yeah.
1%. So, of actors. Um, so I was like, I'm not throwing away my acting career, and
No.
and I had looked at one point of even be willing myself to have moved to Australia. Like that was I was open to that because I wanted to just do something different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so now let me so yeah, like I was saying, long distance though, you really want to have the right you really got to know like who you're dealing with. And to be honest with you, for me and her, we're I'm into numerology and astrology, and we ran our numbers, like our birthday natal chart, and we got a reading, essentially a small reading, that really actually kind of reinforced even things like this podcast itself. That we should build something together, and that we have this alpha leader, um, both have it in us. It's just she's more of a administrative, and I'm more of like a big picture kind of like vision
Mm.
guy. I'm the vision guy, and she's more like the people person. So it's a perfect compliment. It's a perfect compliment, and and for us, the fact of when you look at a person and it's not so much like tell me everything that happened in your past relationship and tell me all the
Mm.
things you did wrong to you and all this and that. But when you know where a person is coming from in that relationship, you know how they were treated, and you have a little bit of I'm not a psychoanalyst or anything like that, but in my past relationship going through some stuff, it brought a lot of questions up, and you can learn a lot on YouTube nowadays, and listening to videos about narcissism and sociopath behavior and psychopath behavior, and a lot of that stuff, and then listening to things about people that had been because I dated women in the past that had been like molested as children. Okay. And when you deal with people like that, sometimes what happens is a person is like heavily abused. And I'm not a therapist, but I learned this and I saw it in action, is that they almost have like such a protection mechanism within them that they become the abuser themselves, almost to protect themselves,
Protection. Yeah.
And there's a lot of other things that motivate it as well. It's just like lack of self-esteem, low value, like, you know what I mean, not really knowing themselves, like defining themselves through sex because that was just like from the beginning how they were
Yeah.
objectified. um, and I'm an empathetic person. And when you're an empathetic person and you're open to certain things, it's kind of like vampires. They can't do anything. If they try to break into your house, they don't have as much power. They don't have their power. If you invite them into your house, then they are at full power. And
Yeah.
it's not to demonize or make a person a bad thing, but it's like when you accept a person or a thing at a face value and what they're telling you, and you're not really kind of doing the analysis of the back end of what they're telling you and what type of like, for example, with if you're a male dealing with a female, you know I want to know if that woman has been had a dad around while she's being raised. That's important. you know I want to know what the relationship was with the dad. When did the parents divorce? When did they stop being together?
Hmm.
These are important things that you need to know with a woman. Was the male raised by just his mom, or did he have a complete family in the household? And when you
Yeah.
start to have this information about a person, you can start to develop that's a very basic, quick summarization of just some of the things you want to start with. And then you start getting into, obviously, if they had children, if they were married, how that went, how they were treated. And that'll give you kind of like an expectation of what the patterns they're used to in their relationships. Because whether
Yeah.
they're aware of it or not, there's patterns that have been developed from that past relationship.
Right.
And if a person hasn't done the work on themselves, you know whether it's therapy, whether it's hypnotherapy, whether it's you know really just sitting with themselves and doing the self development and doing the reading and having the aptitude and the awareness to self
Mm.
actualize to a um what
To a
is it
degree.
to a productive level, yeah, to an
Mhm.
efficient level. Have you self actualized to be effective, you
Yeah.
know and
Yeah.
realistic and grounded and reality centered, not lost in some delusional victim mindset, or that's limiting you and where you're going in your world. You know what I mean? Because then you're no good to really anybody other than dead weight, because you're going to
Yeah.
project and impute that self-limiting belief into that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's again, and that's something that, like I said to you, I've having spoken to my sister and things like that, and having done, I mean, I've done a lot of work, and me and my sister have both gone through life changing events in our relationships, like recently. And when I say recently, I say in the last 7 years. And the works in progress have happened at different stages. So um, we were talking about this the other day, and you and I have been doing some work separately, while your life was going on over there and my life here in the last 6 years has been going on here. I've done a lot of deep diving into the person I am, the qualities that I have, the baggage, and that I've the armor that I've had to place on me based on my previous relationships as well, and really start working with psychologists, with delving into reading books, with spending time on my own, and really seeing who is it that's showing up into a relationship that is causing the outcome to be the volatileness, the taken advantage of, all of that kind of stuff. And so knowing that, me having done the work here, becoming the best version to date of myself, and you doing similar things where you are, when you meet a person that has done healing or is aware that they needed healing, because a lot of people end a relationship because it's been volatile, and it's like it was their fault, they did this, they did that, and because of them, this is why I'm in this situation. You don't take on that blame, you don't take on that level of responsibility to go, hang on a second, how was I showing up? So making sure that when you show up in a relationship and you really are invested, and there is something there that you just know that there is something worth looking into, seeking, working for, you really need to be aware that there is always a level of responsibility that you need to take for your own actions. And if you don't, you mentioned before, you could go back and ask my exes about me. You know, if you don't do the work, or if you don't acknowledge, you'll be in a relationship where the other person will have the ability to bring out the worst in you. Like my ex, not my ex, one of my exes, he and I were very volatile. We were young and we were volatile. And I think it's, I don't say I'm innocent in this. Yes, a
Let's
lot of bad
start.
things happened.
Let's start a new episode with that.
All right.